we're here with Councillor John Parker. You have been a councillor and an MPP. How has your experience as an MPP made it easier to work as a councillor?
Well, in a number of ways. First and foremost, having served at another level, I have an understanding of what how the game is played, how the process works, what the constraints are at the provincial level, and an understanding of the nature of the interface between the two levels. And I've also had experience dealing with issues and dealing with people and dealing with people and their relationship to the issues that come up from time to time. And I've come to spot how good governments deal with issues and how slippery governments deal with issues. So I would say my experience at both levels has helped me in my job. And the fact that I've had experience at a different level gives me that added dimension of experience, so that I have some understanding of what happens at Queen's Park and the constraints and the opportunities that present themselves in the priorities and concerns and requirements that the provincial government faces and can be expected to face, and what that means to municipal governments and how we best work with one another to achieve common goals.
Do you feel that there have been missed opportunities that Toronto hasn't taken to reap benefits from the provincial government?
You know, the clearest example of the need for the two levels to work together well, and the clearest example of where we have failed to work together satisfactorily, is on transit planning and transit construction. And we can spend all day talking about that, but I am firmly of the view that we have not done what we should do to build proper high-order transit in the City of Toronto. We have not done a good job of integrating our transit in Toronto with transit in the Greater Toronto area. And the plans that are currently in place are a product of a very strange relationship between the municipal government and the provincial government that has given us a plan that is not the best plan for the city or for the province.
What challenges are there to implementing transit at a provincial level?
Well, transit, any way you want to slice it, is a very expensive proposition. It's expensive to build, it's expensive to run, and it is enormously significant in the impact that it has on the kind of community that you build. Transit is more than just the provision of services, it is the core of the plan for building the community that it serves. And you can't do one without the other. You can't do a proper job planning transit without having a clear idea of the kind of community you want to build, because one is the byproduct of the other. And conversely, the kind of community that you build will dictate the kind of transit that you need to serve it. But it really should begin with having a clear view of the kind of community you want to build, and then you achieve that goal by doing everything else in a way that's consistent with the goal you're trying to pursue. And that is fundamentally the remit of a municipal government. But the municipal government doesn't have the funding that's required to finance the enormous cost of building transit. So here at the city, we have very clear ideas of the kind of communities we want to build and the kind of city we want to build. But we have to go to Queen's Park for the money to build the single most important component of determining the kind of city that we are going to build and the kind of communities that we're going to wind up with. And Queen's Park comes to us on matters of transit and says, this is what we're prepared to spend and this is what we're prepared to do with it. Take it or leave it. And if their proposal conforms to the city's plan, then we're in a beautiful place. But what we have found most recently is that what the province is prepared to build is not in all ways consistent with the kind of city that we are trying to produce. And we're spending billions of dollars in the process. it's billions of provincial taxpayer dollars, and quite frankly, it's future provincial taxpayers' dollars, because they're borrowing the money now. So the province will be going into debt to build new high-order transit in Toronto. And that bill will be paid by future generations, who will get the benefit of it as the lifespan of the projects lives on into future generations. As I say, in my view anyway, the transit that is being proposed doesn't, in all respects, conform to the goals of our city planners and our vision of the kind of city and we want to build in the kind of communities we want to encourage. And it's a shame when you think of the enormous investment that's being made, and the fact that once it's built, the systems that we are creating are going to be with us for generations to come, and so we'll have a monumental influence on things for generations to come. It's a good thing because we need it, and it's better than the status quo, but it's not going to be as good as it could have been. And you asked what are the challenges. So part of the challenge is the different priorities and different concerns and different interests. Another concern is the different political pressures that are brought to bear. When you're dealing with projects of this sort, when we're in the confines of a room like this, we can look at it as an academic exercise in drawing up a plan for the kind of result that we think makes sense. But once you leave this room, you are then dealing with the larger world and the interests and concerns and perspectives that they bring to bear, and the political pressures that they bring to bear. And if all of those pressures are not in line with the vision that we agree on around this table, then we have an internal conflict that governments tend to resolve in favor of the political pressures rather than in favor of the best decisions. And,
how has amalgamation presented challenges on the transit front?
Amalgamation has actually been the best news possible for the interest of transit expansion. Before amalgamation, we had the specter of different municipalities within Metro Toronto, each with its own little political base and its own pressures and concerns and its own interests that brought pressures to bear of a political nature that weren't in the best interest of good transit planning. And I would guess that that's why we wound up with a short subway on Shepherd rather than a complete line on Eglinton. Under the system that we had at the time, there was a very influential mayor in North York who brought his firepower to bear, and he got the subway he wanted, and Eglinton didn't get the service that it needs. And we are now picking up the pieces afterwards and putting a line along Eglinton, which
what line would you want to see on Eglinton?
I would favor light rail for Eglinton, and light rail is what we're getting. But I would have had light rail on the surface from end to end, right through the heart of town. And if it is to go underground, and I wouldn't resist a strong urge to put light rail underground through the central part, because that's where it is. The roadway is narrow, and it's a bit of a tough sell to ask people to give up their road surface for a dedicated rail line. I understand that. If it must go underground, the stations should be spaced closely enough that they resemble the spacing of stops on a surface line. The problem we're creating for ourselves right now is we're burying the line for a good long stretch, for reasons that I understand. But because it's buried, each station is an expensive project in and of itself, so we have relatively few of them. And the stations are spaced so far apart that the system that we're building for all the investment that we're putting into it is not going to serve the communities between the stations. And what we need is a system that serves everybody right along the line. And at the very least, high order transit along Eglinton should make buses on Eglinton redundant. But my concern is that the stations are sufficiently far apart that we're going to need to put buses on the road after all to serve the areas in between. That's not what we should be trying to do. And we have this odd situation where we are building a surface rail system and then burying it and treating it like a subway. Well, my view would be, well, first of all, the best thing we could do would be to have a surface rail system and have it on the surface. I wouldn't expect to win that argument. I realize that's a tough sell. I'm not going to win that one. But once we decide to put it underground, we should make it a subway. Because a conventional subway does a better job of being a subway than surface rail does. So we actually, a surface rail system is more expensive to build than a subway system. It's cheaper because it's on the surface, but in all other respects, the components are more expensive. So we're paying extra for technology that's made to run on the surface, but then we're burying it underground where there's better technology that we could use for that purpose, and it's available at a lower cost. And it does a more satisfactory job of doing what we're asking it to do. So I really have trouble defending the decision to invest in surface rail technology on Eglinton and then run it through tunnels underground, and particularly when it's done in a way that leaves the stations so distantly spaced from one another that we're probably going to need buses after all. And if the one thing that we should have been able to do with putting in an expensive new system is to get the buses off the road.
One of the things that Toronto seems to be doing that isn't really seen in other cities with mass transit is that we don't build constantly. Why is it that we seem to build every 10 years when it becomes an emergency rather than continually building for our population?
The initial subway line on Yonge Street, built 60 years ago, 1954, was financed by the TTC from the fare box. But the TTC had to save up for a long period of time before it had enough cash in the bank to support the financing of that subway line. We are now at a point where transit service in the city of Toronto is such an expensive proposition that we can't even finance the operating costs, just the day-to-day operating costs out of the fare box. We finance most of the operating costs out of the fare box, about 80-some-odd%, the most of any system in North America. But we don't come anywhere close to generating the revenues from the fare box that we need to operate the system and build new transit. We need, at the TTC, help is needed from other sources. So some of that help comes from the municipal taxpayer, and so the city subsidizes the operations of the TTC. The city doesn't have the resources to finance the required operating subsidy of the TTC and finance the construction of new high-order transit as well. Those are, when I say high-order, I mean LRT and subway, the kind of deluxe, high-volume, high-speed transit systems. These are billion-dollar propositions, and we are facing enormous costs just keeping our existing system operating and upgrading the outdated portions that we're trying to address with it. When it comes to building new transit, we need support from another revenue source, and the logical place for any municipality in Canada to look for additional help is to the provincial government. Each municipality is, after all, a creature of the provincial government, and the provincial government has a broader tax base than the city has. Not asking the rest of the province to subsidize our transit system, we're just asking that the Toronto, the resources that go to the province of Ontario from Toronto residents be applied in ways that produce an effective result for Toronto residents. So we rely on the provincial government to finance the construction of the really expensive projects. Well, the province operates on a basis of a fresh budget every year, and the budget is always cloaked in secrecy, and then it's announced to everybody all at the same time. Even the members of the provincial cabinet don't see the budget until it's announced by the treasurer. The premier and the treasurer get to see the budget in making, but the other members of the legislature, the other members of cabinet, the other people outside the very close circle don't get to see that budget until it's announced. And transit is such a major expense that it's one of those things that gets included in provincial budgets, and it's released as an announcement along with everything else that's announced in the budget on a year-to-year basis. And sometimes transit is included in the budget, sometimes it isn't. But it has never been a continual, ongoing commitment. Now, to be fair, in the budget that was just brought forward and voted down, there was at least the stated commitment of sustained funding over the indefinite future, or maybe some measurable period of time. But I think it was something like $2 billion per year for transit expansion. We've never seen that before, and that's the kind of thing that we need in order to have regular, steady construction projects. But when we deal with projects on a one-off basis, waiting for an announcement from Queen's Park in their budget to say, in this year's budget we are financing X dollars for this project or X dollars for that project, that's when we find out what sort of project we can proceed with and what kind of resources will be available to us for the purpose.
On the TTC, there's very limited accessibility for people in wheelchairs and people who have physical disabilities, and it always seems that perhaps there could have been more done. Why is there this seemingly disconnect between transit planning and the disabled community?
I would challenge your premise there, actually. I believed what people were telling me with comments like that when I was told, oh, the TTC is not satisfactorily taking care of the needs of people with disabilities of one sort or another. I believed that until I sat on a panel of nationwide representatives, including transit providers and people with disabilities of various kinds. And I stood back and I heard from everybody else say, nobody comes close to the levels of service that the TTC provides. And people in wheelchairs and people with white canes and so on, they were sitting there saying, the rest of you folks, have a look at what the TTC does. We only wish you could come close to the levels of service that they provide. Having said that, we're not where we want to be. Why not? It's because, quite seriously, this is a need that nobody turned their mind to until a lot of our system was already built. Our system was not built to accommodate people in wheelchairs. Our system was not built to accommodate people with visual impairments. So we're retrofitting a lot of measures to accommodate those needs. So we're putting elevators into our stations. So that's an expensive project itself. So we can't do them all overnight, but over a period of time, I think we've given ourselves 10-year time horizon. Part of this is driven by the Provincial Ontarians with Disabilities Act requirements, but the TTC on its own is determined to upgrade its system as it's able to with funding that's available to the point where all of our stations will be accessible by wheelchair from somewhere or other. We are not expecting that every gate will have an access point that's suitable for wheelchairs, but each station will have a way for people with wheelchairs to get in. Each station will have a way of accommodating people with visual impairments and so on. Our buses, one of the remits for any new bus we buy is that it accommodate passengers with wheelchairs. Now, you don't run out and throw away all your old buses right away, but as buses are taken out of service, they're replaced by new buses with low floors, And they kneel. You've probably seen them. The driver presses a button that goes beep, 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 and the bus comes down to something close to ground level. A little ramp comes out, and you can get a wheelchair in, and then it comes back up to operating level, and it goes on. So that is a measure that is in place now, and it's entirely possible that all of our buses now are low floor buses with wheelchair accessibility. I know that we were working on that, but I think we're there now. Certainly, every new bus we buy, that's one of the requirements. We're going to enormous lengths to design our new streetcars to accommodate wheelchairs, and that's a little bit tricky because a streetcar can't pull over to the curb. It operates on the track where it's restricted, and in some cases a streetcar will stop on the roadway. In other cases it'll stop at an island with a little station, and that island will have certain dimensions and characteristics. In other cases it'll stop at a different island with different characteristics. The ramps that we're installing in our new streetcars are being made so that they can accommodate wheelchairs arriving from ground level, wheelchairs arriving from a platform of a certain height, and wheelchairs arriving from a platform of a different height. That's being designed right into the new streetcars that are on order. So we are not 100% accessible, but we're close to it, and we're working on those areas that still have a way to go.
Obviously, the new streetcars aren't hitting the streets yet. So what do people who are disabled do in terms of public transit in between the gap of this new accessibility that will be coming in?
Well, one of those, there are two dimensions to that. One relates to the TTC and one relates to a new measure that the city has implemented independent of the TTC. The TTC has an elaborate Wheel-Trans program, which is almost a separate transit system. Almost a separate transit system for people with disabilities and people with other mobility needs. And that includes dialysis patients who have to travel with apparatus. Now it's not as convenient as just going down the corner and catching a bus. You have to order up Wheel-Trans, and you have to give them something like 24 hours notice. You have to be there when they arrive. There's a half-hour leeway, I think. So it's a little more clunky, a little more cumbersome, and the requirements are a little trickier to work with. And the same thing at the other end on the return trip. You have to predict when you're going to be available to be picked up and carried home. Because the buses aren't just generally circulating at large, and you can't just call in and have them arrive over a short period. You got to book them. But the system will provide that level of service, that it will get people to where they need to go, and, with a caregiver if necessary, with apparatus if necessary, with the wheelchair. That's the least of the challenges. And as I say, a lot of patients, a lot of riders who require Wheel-Trans now because they're on wheelchairs, they'll be able to get on the conventional buses and conventional streetcars and the conventional subway with loading ramps and with elevators and so on. So a lot of people who need Wheel-Trans now, or have needed Wheel-Trans in the past, don't need Wheel-Trans anymore and won't in the future because the whole system is becoming more accessible. But for those who need it, Wheel-Trans is there. And you pay for Wheel-Trans with a bus ticket. It costs you no more. It costs the TTC a lot more. It's a very expensive service to provide. But the user just pays with a bus ticket. That's what the TTC is doing. And the TTC is subsidized in that. I mean, it costs something like $35 to give on average, to give a ride to someone who pays with a $2.50 bus fare. So the rest of the cost is picked up by a subsidy that comes